My daughter-in-law sent me a message on a Thursday afternoon telling me I was welcome to attend the grand opening of the restaurant I had funded, as long as I stayed in the back near the kitchen and didn't talk to any of the press. I read it 3 times, sitting at my kitchen table with my reading glasses on and a cup of coffee going cold beside me. Then I set down my phone, picked up the folder on the counter, the cream-colored one with the lease agreement inside it. And I called my attorney. His name is Walter Freed. He has kept my affairs in order for 19 years. I called him at 2:43 on a Thursday afternoon, and I told him what had happened. Not just the message, all of it. 8 months of all of it, compressed into 4 minutes while he listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I pay him for. When I finished, Walter was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Irene, whose name is on the lease?" "Mine," I said. "And the equipment financing?" "Mine. And the contractor invoices for the build-out?" "Every single one," I said. "I signed them myself." Another pause. "Then," "Well," Walter said, "then I think you know what you'd like me to do." I did. I'd known since the moment I set the phone down. I just needed to hear my own voice say the situation out loud to someone who wouldn't tell me I was overreacting. By 5 o'clock that afternoon, Walter had sent formal notice to the landlord that I, Irene Calloway, the sole lessee and responsible party on the commercial space at 412 Harbor Street, was initiating the early termination clause. He copied the equipment finance company. He copied the general contractor, who still had 2 outstanding invoices that I'd been holding. I had told Walter to hold them. I'd read that contract, too. The build-out wasn't complete until I said it was complete. My son called me at 6:15. He was already crying. He said, "Mom, what did you do? What did you do to Danny?" I told him exactly what I'd done. And then I told him why. Here is the why. Because you deserve to know it from the beginning. My name is Irene Calloway. I'm 63 years old, and I have been in the restaurant business since I was 22, when I took a job washing dishes at a diner outside of Knoxville, Tennessee, because it was the only work I could find, and I had a son to feed. My husband Philip had died the year before. A car accident on Route 40 in November, black ice, nobody's fault, and suddenly I was 21 years old with a 14-month-old baby and a checking account with less than $400 in it. I washed dishes. Then I waited tables. Then I learned to cook because the line cook kept calling in sick, and the owner, a woman named Dot, said she'd teach me if I stayed late 3 nights a week. I stayed late. I learned. I got good at it the way you get good at things when getting good is the only option you have. I worked in other people's kitchens for 11 years. I saved everything I could. I drove a car with 1 working window until my son was in middle school because a working car with a bad window is still a working car, and I needed the difference in the bank. When he was 12, I opened my first place. A 16-seat lunch counter in a strip mall in East Nashville. I called it Calloway's because I wanted my son to see his name on something his mother built. It took 4 years to turn a real profit. In those 4 years, I worked 7 days a week and took 1 vacation, a long weekend at a state park when my son was 15, which he has told me since was the best trip of his childhood. I believe him. We slept in a tent and cooked on a camp stove, and it cost me $112 total. And I still have the photo of him holding a fish he caught and grinning like the sun was inside him. Calloway's became 2 locations. Then 3. I sold 2 of them in my mid-50s when I was tired of managing staff across multiple kitchens and wanted to do something slower. I kept the original. 16-seat lunch counter had grown into a 40-seat neighborhood restaurant with a full liquor license and a reputation for the best Sunday brunch in the county. I ran it myself, front and back, with a staff of 8 that I had trained and kept and treated like people, because I know what it feels like to be in their position, and I never forgot it. That is who I am. That is what I built. With a bad car window and a camp stove and a dead husband and a baby in a diner dish room at 22 years old. My son's name is Griffin. He's 34 now, tall like his father, funny in that quiet way where the joke lands before you realize he's made one. I am prouder of him than I have words for, and I want you to know that before I tell you what happened this past year, because some of what happened will make you angry at him. I don't want you angrier than I am. He is not a bad man. He just loved someone who slowly convinced him that loving her and honoring me were two different things that couldn't exist in the same room. Her name is Danielle. Danny. She came from money, or the remains of it. Her father had been an investment banker who'd had a bad decade followed by a divorce, and what was left was a comfortable childhood memory and a mother, Vivienne Shaw, who moved through the world like she was still funding it. Vivienne had the kind of bearing that looks like confidence until you realize it's actually the specific rigidity of someone terrified of being found out. Griffin met Danny 6 years ago. She was smart, ambitious, restless, the kind of woman who walks into a room and immediately begins calculating its social geography. I liked her, at first. She was interested in the restaurant business, she said. She had ideas. She asked good questions. I thought, this one might actually understand what I do. She understood it perfectly, just not in the way I thought. The idea for the new restaurant was Danny's. A concept place, farm to table, fine dining adjacent, the kind of menu that changes weekly and uses the word curated without irony. She wanted it in the revitalized waterfront district downtown, 412 Harbor Street, a beautiful old brick space that had been a hardware store and then a failed tapas bar and was now available for lease. She brought me the listing. She had already calculated the build-out costs and written a preliminary business plan with projected returns that were, I noted, slightly optimistic, but not unreasonably so. I asked Griffin what he thought. He said he thought Danny was brilliant and that they could run the front of house together while I consulted on house to backing and covered the financial Halpesting until the restaurant was established enough to service its own debt. I said I'd think about it. I thought about it for 3 weeks. I had Walter look at the lease. I had my accountant look at the projections. I revised the numbers to be more honest, and then I sat down with both of them and I said, yes, I'll back it. I told them my terms. I would be the sole lessee on the lease because I am the one with the business credit and the track record. And because, as I explained, in my experience, a restaurant that has 2 names on the paperwork and 1 source of funding will eventually create confusion about who's actually making decisions. I would hold the equipment financing in my name. I would sign off on all contractor invoices because the build-out was the largest single expense, and I wasn't about to hand that oversight to people who had never done a build-out before. In exchange, once the restaurant opened and was operating at a sustainable margin, 18 months, we agreed. Griffin and Danny would begin buying out my investment at terms we'd structure together. They agreed. We shook on it across my kitchen table. I had Walter draft a simple memo of understanding, and we all signed it. I filed it in a cream-colored folder and got to work. The first 6 months were fine, better than fine. The space came together beautifully. The kitchen design was mine, and it was good. The contractor we used was a man I'd worked with twice before and trusted. I enjoyed those months, if I'm honest. There was something that felt like a beginning, like all the experience I'd accumulated was being poured into something new, and I was doing it alongside my son, and that felt like a gift. I started noticing the shift somewhere around month 4. Small things at first. Danny began copying Vivienne on email threads about the concept and decor. Vivienne, who had no role in the business, no financial stake, and no restaurant experience, began offering opinions that were passed along to me as suggestions. The color of the banquettes, the typeface on the menu. He said, whether we should have a logo or just the name. I let it go. A mother wanting to be involved in her daughter's business. I understood that impulse. Then Vivienne began attending the weekly check-in meetings. I showed up to the 3rd one to find her already seated at the contractor's table with a notepad and a freshly pressed jacket. Nobody had told me she was coming. When I mentioned this afterward to Griffin, he said Danny felt it would be helpful to have her mother's perspective, since Vivienne had grown up around hospitality. What that meant, I later learned, was that Vivienne's father had belonged to a country club. I let that go too. I was telling myself what decent people always tell themselves. It's not about you, Irene. Focus on the work. The seating chart for the grand opening was the moment I stopped letting things go. Not because I knew right away what it meant, Because I found out by accident, the way you always find out. Danny had set up a shared project folder online. I was in it for lease documents and contractor timelines. One afternoon, I got a notification that a new file had been added. It was the draft floor plan for opening night. I opened it. The restaurant held 84 seats, and the opening was by reservation only, media, and invited guests. I found my name in the layout. I was at a two-top near the service station, the small table wedged between the pass-through and the back hall, where servers would be moving constantly all night. I want you to understand what that table was. It was the table you put someone at when you don't want anyone to see them talking to the important guests. It was the table where the noise from the kitchen would cover any conversation. It was the table with the worst sightline in the room, behind a decorative column, angled angle away from the bar, where the critics and the journalists and Vivienne's social contacts would be gathered. I sat for a long time looking at my name in that spot. I thought about calling Griffin right then. I decided not to. I had learned over 63 years that the first conversation about a thing like this should never happen while you're still feeling the hit of it. I waited until the next morning. I called him after my first cup of coffee when I was steady. "Sweetheart," I said, "I saw the seating chart for the opening night. I think there might be an error. I'm showing myself at the table by the service station." A pause, the kind that answers the question before the words do. "Mom," he said. "So the thing is, Danny's been working really hard on the layout with her mom, and they feel like, for press purposes, it makes more sense to have the people who are going to be doing the talking up front, near the bar. The critics, the writers, a couple of people from the restaurant association. You know how Danny is about first impressions." "I do know how Danny is about first impressions. I've known since the first week I met her." "I'm the one funding this restaurant," I said. "I'm the one who designed the kitchen. My name has been on this project since before the lease was signed." "Of course, yeah, we know that, and it's not about. It's just a seating thing, Mom." For one night, I repeated. "Danny just wants the evening to feel a certain way. You know, polished, elevated. She's working so hard on this, and her mom's been helping her, and they have a vision for what the presentation should look like, and they feel like the kitchen side of things should stay more background for the opening." The kitchen side of things. That's what he called me. The kitchen side of things. I said, "I see. Let me think about it." I hung up, and I sat with it for the rest of the morning. Then, I called my friend Nadia. Nadia has been my closest friend for 26 years. She is 71 years old, has buried one husband, raised 4 children, and taught high school English for 33 years. She does not soften things. I told her about the seating chart, about being called the kitchen side of things, about Vivienne at the meetings with her notepad, about 8 months of slow incremental sideways movement. Nadia set down whatever she was holding. I heard it click on her counter. "Irene," she said, "listen to yourself. You are funding a restaurant where they don't want you visible at the opening. You are the money, and they want you out of the shot." "I know." "Do you? Because you're talking like you're still deciding whether you have a right to be upset, and I'm telling you, you are past deciding that. You are in the part where you do something." I told her I didn't want to blow up Griffin's future over a table at a party. "It's not a table at a party," Nadia said. "It's the opening night of a restaurant that exists because of you. They're telling you to be invisible at your own creation. And if you let them do it at the opening, you'll be invisible at the second one, and the third one, and the retirement party they throw for Griffin, where they tell a beautiful story about everything they built together and put one sentence about initial financial backing at the very end in small print." I didn't answer. "You know I'm right," she said. I did know. The knowing was the problem. Knowing and doing are 2 different kinds of hard. I gave them 3 more days. I thought, maybe Griffin will call and say something changed. Maybe Danny will move the table. Neither of those things happened. What happened instead was that on a Thursday afternoon, while I was at my restaurant doing the ordering for the week, I got a message from Danny directly. I want to type it out exactly as it came because the exact words matter, and I have read them enough times that I have them memorized. "Hi, Irene. Just following up on the seating conversation. I know. Griffin talked to you, and I want to be transparent. We really need the opening to land well with the press and the industry contacts we've invited. And Vivienne has some relationships with food writers that we're trying to cultivate carefully. We think it's best if you attend, but stay toward the back. Maybe the kitchen area would actually feel more natural for you since that's your background? You're still welcome to come, of course, as long as the funding situation stays on track. Let me know if you have any questions. You're still welcome to come, of course, as long as the funding situation stays on track. I put the phone face down on my desk. I picked it up again. I read it again. I put it down again. I looked out the window of my office at my restaurant, the one with my name on it, the one I had built from nothing, and I made a decision that had been building for 8 months. I picked up the cream-colored folder. I found Walter's number. I pressed call. Walter answered on the second ring. I read him the message, all of it. Whose name is on the lease? He said. Mine. And the equipment financing? Mine. And the contractor invoices? Everyone, Walter. A pause. Irene, you have a right to terminate that lease. Early termination clause is in Section 11. You've got 60 days before the build-out is complete. If you act now, you're inside the window. I know, I said. I read the contract. Of course you did. I could hear him almost smile. What do you want me to do? I want you to send termination notice to the landlord today. And hold the remaining contractor invoices. Don't release payment until I tell you to. And send Danny and Griffin a formal letter from your office so that this is on the record and not in text messages. If I send that letter today, this is real. The opening is in 6 weeks. They won't be able to find another backer in that time. The restaurant, as it stands, won't open. I know exactly what it means, I said. They told me I was welcome to fund it from the back by the kitchen. So I'm making a decision from the kitchen. I'm the one who reads the contracts. I always have been. Walter sent the letters at 4:47 that afternoon. The landlord received formal notice that I was invoking the early termination clause and that all future contact regarding the property at 412 office should go through Walter's office. The equipment finance company was notified that financing was being restructured. The contractor received notice that the remaining invoices were under legal review pending resolution of a dispute. I did not text Griffin. I did not text Danny. I went home, made a pot of soup. Chicken and white beans, the kind my mother made when things were hard, and I sat at my own table and I ate it. Griffin called at 7:12 that evening. He was not crying yet, but he was close to it. That tight voice that means the tears are right behind the words. Mom, what is this? Walter sent us a letter. The landlord called. What did you do? I did what Danny's message asked me to do, I said. She told me I was welcome to attend as long as the funding stayed on track. I've decided the funding is not going to stay on track. I'm exercising my right as the sole responsible party on everything associated with that property. You can't just, Mom, the opening is in 6 weeks. We've already sent invitations. The food writers are confirmed. Vivienne has spent months on the press outreach. Vivienne. Yes, I said. I'd like you to think about something, Griffin. Vivienne has spent months on the press outreach for a restaurant she has no financial stake in, whose lease, equipment, and build-out are entirely in my name, while her daughter sent me a message telling me to stay near the kitchen, because that's more natural for my background. Silence. I want to ask you something, I said. And I want you to answer me honestly, not as Danny's husband, but as my son. When you read that message she sent me, what did you feel? He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice had changed. I didn't see it before she sent it. Did she tell you she was sending it? She said she was going to clarify the seating situation. I didn't know what she wrote, and when you read it, what did you feel? A longer silence. Like something was wrong, he said, quietly. Like I should have called you 3 days ago, when you said you wanted to think about it. Like I let something happen that I should have stopped. That's the most important thing he said to me in this entire story. I want you to understand why. Because Griffin, in that moment, was not defending Danny. He was not running the script his mother-in-law had prepared. He was standing in the fact of what had happened and telling me he saw it. That matters. That is the thing that made everything that came after possible. I love you, I said. And I need you to understand what I'm doing and why. I am not trying to destroy something you care about. I am making a decision about what I'm willing to fund and on what terms. I have spent 41 years building things and being taken seriously in rooms that were not easy for a woman like me to be taken seriously in. I am not going to write a check and stand in the back by the kitchen at my own creation because your mother-in-law has relationships with food writers she'd like to cultivate. Mom! No, I said. Let me finish. Your wife sent me a message that said I was welcome to come as long as the money kept coming. I need you to hear the logic of that sentence, Griffin. She separated the money from the person. She wanted the funding without the funder. And I am telling you, that is not something I've ever let happen in 41 years of business, and it's not something I'm going to let happen now, not even for you. Especially not for you, because someday you're going to build something of your own, and I need you to know what it looks like when someone respects the builder. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "What happens now?" That depends on a conversation we haven't had yet, I said. But it's not a conversation for tonight. Tonight I need you to sit with what happened. Will you do that? He said he would. He did. Vivienne called the next morning at 8:45. I let it go to voicemail. The message was 18 seconds long, and it said, "Irene, I think there's been a terrible miscommunication, and I really hope we can speak today because there's quite a lot riding on the next few weeks, and I'm sure we can find a solution that works for everyone. Please call me back at your earliest convenience." I called her back at noon from the parking lot of my restaurant in my kitchen clogs and my work jacket with a sauce stain on the left sleeve, because some conversations need to be had while you're standing in the truth of who you are. "Vivienne," I said when she picked up, "I got your message." "Oh, Irene, good. I'm so glad. Listen, I think what happened is there was a breakdown in communication around the seating, and obviously nobody meant to imply." "Vivienne?" I said. "Danny's message was 11 sentences long. There was no breakdown. Every sentence was intentional. A pause. Well, I think Danny was trying to be transparent about the vision for the evening." "She was transparent," I agreed. "She told me I was welcome to attend my own project as long as the money continued." I found that clarifying. "Irene, surely you can understand that a restaurant opening with press in attendance has to project a certain image. The concept we've built, and I've been deeply involved, as you know, is aspirational. It's meant to attract a certain clientele, and we have to be thoughtful about." She paused, choosing words. The presentation, I repeated. "The overall aesthetic of the evening." "I see. I'm the funding source with the wrong aesthetic." "That is not what I said." "It's what you mean," I said. "You mean that I look like what I am, which is a woman who has spent 40 years in a kitchen, and that doesn't fit the image you're trying to project. And you would like me to finance that image from a polite distance." Silence on her end. The kind that means I've said something true that she was hoping I wouldn't say. "I'm going to tell you what I told Griffin," I said. "I have never once handed anyone a blank check. I became the responsible party on every contract associated with that property because I have been in business long enough to know that people who want your resources are not always people who will treat you well once they have them. I protected myself the way any businesswoman would. And when your daughter sent me a message making clear that my presence was conditional on my payment, I acted on that information. This is..." Vivienne's voice shifted, the graciousness dropping like a coat she'd gotten tired of wearing. "This is extraordinary. Do you have any idea what you're doing to Danny? She has given a year of her life to this concept. She has been working with designers, with consultants, with your money," I asked. "With her vision, her creativity, her connections. I thought about that. Then I said, Vivienne, I'd like to ask you something, and I'd like you to answer it honestly. Woman to woman, if I withdrew entirely, if my name came off that lease tomorrow, and you had to replace $280,000 in capital and construction costs in 6 weeks, could you do it?" Silence. "Could Danny do it? Could your family do it?" "Nothing." "That's all I needed to know," I said. "Good luck with the search. Walter's information is in the letter." I hung up. What followed over the next 10 days was the most instructive period of my son's adult life, and I say that without satisfaction, because watching your child learn something expensive is never a pleasure even when it's necessary. With my backing withdrawn, the reality of the situation became undeniable very quickly. The landlord was not interested in renegotiating with Griffin and Danny without a creditworthy primary on the lease. The equipment finance company, which had lent against my business credit history, was not interested in transferring to two people with no business ownership track record. The contractor, who had two unpaid invoices totaling just over $22,000, was not interested in completing the build-out until those were resolved. The Shaws could not cover any of it. I had suspected this for months. A family maintaining the appearance of prosperity rarely has the actual liquidity to back it up, but now the math was visible to everyone, including Griffin. He came to see me alone on the 5th day. Not Danny, not Vivienne. Alone, which told me something. He sat at my kitchen table, the same table where we'd shaken hands on the original agreement, and he looked at his coffee and said, "I keep thinking about the message she sent you. I keep rereading it. You're still welcome to come, of course, as long as the funding situation stays on track." He looked up. "She wrote that to my mother." He put his head in his hands briefly. When he looked up again, his eyes were red. I knew it was wrong when I read it. I didn't say anything. I told myself she was stressed about the opening, and the wording was, I told myself you'd understand what she meant. "I know you did," I said. "I've been telling myself that for months." Every time something felt off, I found a way to make it make sense. The meetings with Vivienne, the way Danny talked about you, the press release she drafted that mentioned my grandmother's investment. Not you, Mom. My grandmother, who has been dead for 12 years, as the source of the restaurant's heritage story. He shook his head. I saw that, and I changed the subject. "I didn't know about the press release. I kept my face even." "I understand it," I said. "I do. You loved her, and you wanted it to work, and it's very easy to look away from things when looking at them means a hard conversation. I've done it myself, but there's a point where looking away becomes its own decision." "The seating chart," he said. "That's when I should have said something. I told you it was just a seating thing. Mom, you built the kitchen. You designed the layout. You know every contractor who's touched that building. You are the most qualified person involved in this project by a margin of about 40 years. And I let Danny put you by the service station because I didn't want to fight." His voice cracked. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I want to tell you what I said next, because this is the part that matters more than the lease or the contractor or the $280,000. I said, "Griffin, you are 34 years old and you are a good man, and you are going to make mistakes that are harder to come back from than this one. What I care about is not that you made the mistake. What I care about is that you can see it. A lot of men can't. Your father could. It's the thing I loved most about him, that he could look straight at something that made him look bad and not flinch away from it. You just did that. Don't let anyone teach you out of that. Not me, not Danny. Nobody," he cried then. I let him. We sat in the kitchen for a long time. He talked about Danny, about how things had changed over the past year, about the voice she'd developed that wasn't quite her own voice, about her mother's influence and how it had grown, and how he'd told himself it was family closeness when it was something else, about how Vivienne had a way of making him feel like an outsider in his own marriage if he disagreed with her. I listened. I didn't say much. Some things a person has to say out loud to their own ears before they can really know them. Danny came to my house 9 days later, without Griffin. That surprised me enough that I showed her in without deciding whether I wanted to. She sat at my table. She looked exhausted in the way that people look when they've been performing for weeks and have run out of the energy to keep performing. She had a piece of paper in her hands and she kept folding and unfolding it. I made tea. I set a cup in front of her. She said, "My mother wants me here to ask you to reinstate everything. She thinks if I come alone and apologize, you'll put the money back." "Is that why you're here?" I asked. "No," she said. She looked at the tea. "I came because I read what I sent you. I really read it. Griffin made me read it out loud to him 2 nights ago, and I heard it for the first time. She smoothed the paper. You're still welcome to come, of course, as long as the funding situation stays on track. I wrote that to the woman who designed the kitchen. Who signed the lease? Who? She stopped. I grew up embarrassed about not having money, and then not having as much as we used to have, and I think I've spent my whole adult life trying to position myself near people and things that look a certain way. And somewhere in that, I started treating you like a resource instead of a person. I treated you like my mother treats the people she writes checks to. I looked at her across the table. That took something, I said. Saying that. I mean it. I know you can't just put everything back, she said. I know what I sent you and I know what it meant, and I know that trust isn't. You can't just restore it because someone apologizes. She finally met my eyes. But I needed you to know that I know what I did, and that it wasn't who I want to be. I believed her. Not completely, and not without reservation, because I am 63 years old, and I have heard a lot of apologies, and I know the difference between the ones that are about the other person's comfort and the ones that cost something. This one cost her something. I could see it. We talked for 2 hours, about the restaurant, about what had gone wrong, about Griffin, about what she wanted her life to look like, versus what her mother had been building toward on her behalf. She said things I hadn't expected her to say. She asked questions she hadn't known how to ask before. I didn't put the money back. I want to be honest about that. Not because I was punishing her, but because the specific configuration, Vivienne in the meetings, Danny as the face, me as the silent financial infrastructure, was not something I was willing to reconstitute. If there was going to be a restaurant, it needed to be structured differently. Everyone at the table in a real way, or no table. What happened in the following months was slow, and then, in the way of good things, sudden. The lease at 412 Harbor Street was ultimately released. Some of my deposit came back, some didn't. The early termination costs were real, and I paid them, because I was the one who signed the contract, and I believe in the integrity of contracts. I count it as what it was. The cost of a lesson. Not the cheapest lesson I've ever bought, but not the most expensive either. Griffin and Danny had a hard few months. I didn't involve myself in it. What I know is that Vivienne became less present in their daily lives, not all at once, but gradually, and that Griffin started asking Danny direct questions instead of absorbing her mother's positions. Whether that continues, I don't know. Marriage is a long project, and I've only seen 1/4 of theirs. What I can tell you is what happened on a Sunday in March, about 5 months after all of this. Griffin called and asked if he could come over, and when he showed up, Danny was with him. They sat at my kitchen table. Griffin had a folder, not a fancy one, a manila folder with some pages inside that he slid across to me. We want to do it differently, he said. If you're still willing, a smaller space, maybe 30 seats. We've been talking about a neighborhood lunch place. Something closer to what you built at the original Calloway's. Nothing aspirational, just good food and people feeling at home. I looked at Danny. She said, I want to learn the actual business this time. Not just the front of house, not just the press, the contracts, the vendors, the numbers. I want to understand what you know. She paused. I want to deserve it, is what I mean. I picked up the folder. I read what was in it. It was a preliminary budget and a short business plan, modest and honest, that had clearly been written by someone trying to be accurate rather than impressive. I set it down. I looked at them both. I said, I have one condition. Just one. My name goes on the lease as co-lessee, not sole lessee this time, all 3 of us. We're all at the table, or none of us are. Griffin looked at Danny. Danny looked at me. Yes, she said, that's what it should have been from the start. We opened in October. 32 seats, pressed tin ceiling, good light through the front windows. The menu changes weekly. We use the word honest instead of curated. On the wall near the door, there's a small framed photo that Danny picked out and had matted herself. It's a photo of me from the late 80s, standing outside the original 16-seat Callaway's in a white apron, squinting into the sun, looking like I have no idea what's coming, which I didn't. Underneath it, the caption says, "This is where it started." On opening day, the 3 of us unlocked the door together. No press, no food writers, no carefully cultivated contacts. Just the 8 people we'd hired, who deserved to see us all walk in as equals, and the first table of customers, who were Nadia and her daughter's husband. Because Nadia has been at every opening of mine for 26 years, and she was not about to miss this one. She walked in, looked around, looked at me, and said, "Front of house, Irene." I said, "Nadia, the whole thing is front of house now." She smiled. She already knew. I thought about Vivienne a few times that fall. Once when I drove past the Shaw House on my way to the new place. Once when a food writer eventually did come in, discovered us the organic way, and wrote something kind that ran in the local paper. Vivienne would have wanted that very much. I imagine she read it. I don't think about her the way you think about an enemy. She was a frightened woman with a big name she was trying to keep polished, and she went about it the wrong way, and the cost of that was her daughter's first real shot at something. That's a steep price. I wouldn't trade places with her. What I have is a daughter-in-law who asks me questions now, who reads the contracts before she signs them, because I made that non-negotiable. Who called me last month to say that the produce vendor was trying to slide through a price increase in the fine print of the renewal, and did I want to handle it or should she, and she already knew the answer and just wanted me to know she'd caught it. She caught it, I said. She should handle it. She handled it. Walked in there with the original contract and a highlighter and came out with the original price. Sent me a one-line text after. Learned from the best. I keep that text. I'm not sure why, except that it's the kind of thing I'd have wanted someone to say to me at 34, when I was figuring out that the world doesn't hand you the benefit of the doubt, and so you keep things in writing, and you read the fine print, and you never sign anything you haven't understood completely. That is not a small thing to pass on. It is maybe the most useful thing I have. My mother used to say that money follows attention. She meant it as practical advice about bookkeeping, but I think she was also right in a larger way. When you stop paying attention to who has access to your resources and on what terms, the resources don't necessarily go where you intend them to go. And when you pay attention, when you are the one who holds the folder and reads the contracts and knows what Section 11 says before money stays where it belongs, with the person who earned it. Earned as. Who built it? Who will go on building? I'm 63 years old. I started with a dish station and a baby and a bad car window, and I am still here. That is the only credential I need. The restaurant doesn't care who your mother was, or what clubs your father belonged to, or whether you use the right words for the right things in the right rooms. The restaurant only cares whether the food is good, and the books balance, and the people who work for you can count on you. Mine can. They always have. That is the whole story. One message that separated the money from the person. One call to Walter, and a smaller, truer restaurant with all 3 names on the door and nobody standing by the service station who doesn't want to be there.